Hello friends. So in honor of this video going up the week of Valentine's Day, I wanted to tie together some fantasy books with some well-known romance tropes. So what I'm going to be doing is mentioning a lot of popular romance tropes and then letting you know some fantasy books that contain them. For each of the tropes that I mentioned, there are of course going to be a lot more books than just the ones that I mentioned. So if you have any of your own recommendations for any of these tropes, feel free to leave those in the comment section down below. But anyway, jumping right into it, I'm going to start with a very popular one, and one that in recent years I feel like has become a little less loved, but is still very popular, and that would be Enemies to Lovers. And the book series that I'm going to be mentioning would be the Legend series by Marie Lu. First three books in this series are basically their own trilogy, and then there is a companion book that comes after, but I devoured that original trilogy so quickly. I actually read it very recently, and as I was reading it, I thought this is kind of quintessential Enemies to Lovers. As I was reading it, it almost inspired this video because I was like, man, this is exactly that trope. And maybe I should talk about some more of these tropes within fantasy books. This one is dystopian, so it is kind of a futuristic view of our own world, and it has turned into something very different than how we see the world now. But despite that, there are some very eerily similar things to what has transpired in the past few years, which is part of what makes dystopian so fun. Our main two perspectives in the story would be June and Day. We go back and forth between these two main characters. One is from a position of privilege. They are a member of the military within the Republic, which is a military-led nation. And then we also follow Day, who represents the people in a lot of ways, and while he doesn't kill, he does cause a lot of trouble for the Republic. And in one instance of him, in a moment of desperation, doing what he can to get away from a soldier, he ends up harming somebody that our other character June cares very much about. There are some tropes in the story that have definitely been utilized a lot in young adult, but it is such a page turner, and while there are moments of depth, I also would say that there isn't really ever a slow moment. It's always moving forward. There's always something intriguing happening, and there's always something that makes you want to turn the page. And I would say that the Enemies to Lovers type of trope within this one is definitely one of the things that makes you want to flip the page. Perhaps a little bit. It's, you know, kind of insta-lovey in this book, but I still think that the way the author explores that in the sequels, I think she does a really good job in handling that. Either way, it's a fantastic, quick-paced dystopian read, especially if you're in the mood for a series that you can just devour basically in a weekend. Next up, we have the Fated Lovers trope, and for that one, I'm going to mention the Witcher series by Andrzej Sapkowski. I'm a huge Witcher fan. I know it has become a lot more popular as of late because of the Netflix adaptation, and originally a lot of people got into Witcher because of the video game, myself included, but the books did actually come before all of that, and there aren't too many stories I've come across where the feeling of fated lovers is better represented than two of the characters in the story. I don't want to say too much about those characters in case you are very unfamiliar with Witcher as a whole. I'll let you kind of discover it, but this series actually starts with two collections of short stories and then moves on to the main series. And within the collection of short stories, we only follow Geralt, our main character, who is a monster hunter in this what is a fantastical world, but is heavily inspired by Central and Eastern European folklore. We only follow Geralt for a time, and then in the series, the world opens up, the perspectives become a lot our cast becomes a lot larger, I should say. And that includes one of Geralt's love interests in the story. How the role of fate and destiny is tied into the story isn't just related to Geralt and this love interest, it's also related to a lot of what transpires in his life. And is there really free will, or is it that you really have a set destiny? You have your fate. Is there any fighting it? And how it's explored in the story is honestly at times very devastating. At times you want certain people's worlds to collide, and other times you don't. But also there's this question of, if I feel this way, is that really how I actually feel, or is it just that there's some force that I can't see or control that is pushing me to feel this way, and does that even make these feelings real? And it actually has a lot of depth to it for a story that on surface level is a monster hunter fights monsters, and that's really not what Witcher is. There's so much more to it. One of the big themes in this story is the fact that while monsters might be killing out of necessity, human beings don't need to, and they kill out of cruelty. So are humans actually the real monsters? And it's got a lot of those sorts of things within it that I really, really love. I do think that if you're interested in learning more about Witcher, just going into it for the fated lovers trope might not give you everything you want. It is definitely more leaning on the fantasy side than it is on the romance side, but I will say the particular couple in this series is one of my favorites. Next up, we have a trope that I know is a lot of people's favorite, or one of their favorites when it comes to romance, and that would be the childhood friends one. And I have a couple of different recommendations for this. One would be Full Metal Alchemist. I love Full Metal Alchemist. If you have not checked it out, please do. There is actually a couple of different anime adaptations that you can look into, and the one that's called Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood is the one that follows the manga more directly. Regardless, there is probably the absolute best childhood friends romance later tropes that I've ever seen. It's so fantastically done. Full Metal Alchemist is fantastic in general. The setup is that we follow these two brothers, Edward and Alphonse, and when they were very young, their mother died and they tried to use alchemy to bring her back from the dead. They were young and they were desperate, and in their efforts to bring their mother back, they ended up harming themselves on accident. One brother lost an arm and a leg. The other brother, Alphonse, his whole body disappeared and his soul had to be attached to a suit of armor. And now they are trying, as they grow older, to do what they can to restore their bodies. So you're following these two, but there's so many more characters than just the two of them. You also follow what is, once again, kind of like Legend, a very military-centered society, and they kind of get caught up in the military. They have other characters who are within the military, including Roy Mustang and Hawkeye. She's fantastic as well. There's just so many characters that are so great. I could go on and on and on about more than just the ones I mentioned. And there's so many twists and turns, and there's so much humor in this story, but then there's some really devastating moments. And it's just such a wonderful series from beginning to end. I absolutely love it. I do think when you first start, the first arc, even though I just said from beginning to end, the first arc is, I mean, it's okay, but I feel like it's as the story progresses that you really get your heart ripped out and torn to pieces. I absolutely love Full Metal. I love the humor. I love the action scenes. It's fantastic all around. Can't recommend enough. And it does have a precious childhood friends to maybe more later trope. Also within that trope, we have the Grisha Trilogy. This also has an adaptation now. And I do think that the Netflix adaptation made most people like both characters a little bit more than a lot of people have in the actual books. However, whether you check out the books or the adaptation, I enjoyed both, and it does contain this trope. We follow a girl named Alina, who has always kind of been a misfit. She grew up in this orphanage, and her best friend growing up, she's always felt this strong connection to them, but she ends up discovering that she has powers, and these powers could be used to save their country. It's a trilogy that is definitely very young adult. It's definitely, I would say, leaning a little on the younger side of young adult, but it's still one that I've always enjoyed coming back to, and I know a lot of people have a lot of opinions about the various different love interests in this series, but I have always been a fan of the childhood friends' particular love interest in this series. Next up, we have the forced marriage trope, and I actually have two for this. One is science fiction, and the other one is fantasy, and that would be Warbreaker by Brandon Sanderson and Winter's Orbit by Everina Maxwell. I'm actually going to start with Warbreaker. It's actually kind of a joke that within Sanderson's stories, a lot of the relationships are arranged marriages that end up kind of working out. So you could actually check out a couple of his other series and probably find it there too. But Warbreaker, I just feel like, is the perfect example of this trope. The setup for the story is we have these two sisters, one who has been trained since birth to fulfill a marriage alliance and understand the culture and the ways of this other kingdom. They view where she lives, this other kingdom, as just filled with heathens. They think these people are terrible. However, they have this alliance, and it's very important that they fulfill it to maintain peace. However, her father She is his favorite daughter, and he does not want to have to give her over to this terrible kingdom. And so he ends up sending his younger daughter, our other main character, to fulfill this marriage alliance instead. She has never prepared for basically anything her entire life. She's always been carefree and silly and happy and does whatever she wants. And now she's thrust into this terrible situation with these people that she has always been told are awful. And while experiencing this arranged marriage, she's discovering there's a lot more than she would expect. And she is delightful, and following her is really fun, while her sister, who was supposed to go, ends up trying to pull off a rescue mission because she thinks, oh no, my other sister is helpless. And just seeing these two characters have to use what they do know of what they supposedly would never use in the situations they're in. It just ends up being kind of humorous, but also you root for them. You appreciate the sister bond, even though it's at a distance. And also the court politics and the court intrigue I really, really enjoyed. There's also some other characters that are quite delightful, and in typical Sanderson fashion, you have a great magic system. If you've ever been nervous to pick up a Sanderson book because you've heard about these hard magic systems, and some of them are very, very large, like the Storm My Archive, this is a great one to start with because it is currently a standalone, so you complete this one book and it is a completed story. And also, it is arguably the most fun of his adult main works. The other ones can be kind of heavy. There's a lot to take in. So if you're looking to start a Sanderson Cosmere book, I think Warbreaker's a great one. And it of course has the arranged marriage trope. Winter's Orbit also has this trope, and I've described this one as a murder mystery in space. However, that aspect of the story and the actual plot of the story, I actually believe comes second to the character development and the relationship between the characters within this arranged marriage. So if you're looking for this particular trope, but within a sci-fi story, this is the perfect one. One of our characters is very likable, but also is perhaps not the most responsible. They kind of can't resist getting into a little bit of trouble, even though they mean well. And then our other character is clearly someone who has gone through a lot. You, as the story goes on, discover more of what they've been through. And just seeing how that character, I think the way they behave, given what they've gone through, is very realistic, but also seeing the way that they are overcoming the things of their past. They are learning to live with this pain, and how this other person that they have this arranged marriage to, the way that their relationship unfolds throughout the story is actually really moving, and I thought the author did a great job with it. Again, there is this other plot that is important for the movement of the story, but I personally really enjoyed this book for the relationship between these characters and the way that the author handled this very traumatic thing that has happened to this character. I think they did a great job with it. I have a lot of other recommendations, but I realized when I went to edit this video that it was very, very long, over a half hour long. So I decided to split it up into 2 parts. So we're gonna go ahead and get the original outro to this video, and you will be seeing a part 2 with some other very popular romance tropes in fantasy books. Also, Luna Bear is cute, and happy Valentine's Day. That's it for some fantasy and a little bit science fiction stories that have some very well-loved and popular romance tropes. But anyway, thanks so much for watching. I hope you have a fantastic rest of your day, and I'll see you all later. Bye.